maybe not being willing to sign a long-term contract of some kind, and that adds to marketing and transaction costs. Reductions of federal agency staff and removal of data and information from federal websites have a variety of impacts, right? It can make it harder just to understand what's happening in your industry. It can also make it harder to get information. In this context here today, I'm particularly worried about food safety risk, right? And bird flu, some of the other things that we know are already risks, right? And it's going to put more burden on each of us in whatever setting we're in to find quality information, right? And to share that information, because it's not going to be as readily available in the places that we have often sought it out, right? But those risks will remain. So just because they aren't being publicized as well does not mean that they're not there. And so we have to go after that information, because the last thing that anyone in this room wants, right, is a food safety incident, say at one of our businesses, that then impacts the ability for you to do business, right? And then fear of immigration enforcement, even among documented immigrants, right, will make workers harder to find as well, right? Folks are really, I mean, we're all afraid, I think, but anyone who is in a vulnerable position is more afraid at this point. Okay. Prices received by producers. So this is looking at the USDA Economic Research Service recent projections that just came out this year. Prices received by producers will rise, okay? This is the mid-range estimate for 2025, okay? And tariffs may further drive up these prices, prices for imports and domestic substitutes. So if there's something that we import from Canada or Mexico and you produce it here, that will also cause the prices that you receive here for those goods to rise, right? So you see eggs getting a lot of press, right? Eggs are at the top there, and then we see some, fruits, pork, beef, price increases there, and then on the bottom, things where we might see price decreases are in some of our commodities, soybeans, wheat, etc. That's the prices received by producers. Okay, that's one part of the of our supply chain here. Also, prices paid by consumers will rise. Okay, so some of those prices received by producers, right? Some of that reflects just an increase in the cost of doing business that gets passed on to consumers. Okay, again, eggs are there at the top. Okay, I felt a little greedy. I took 2 eggs this morning. There was no sign that said I couldn't take 2. I was like, is this okay? I know we're all unsure what egg etiquette is these days. I hope everyone got one who wanted one. I'm sorry if I took too many. So prices paid by consumers are rising. Eggs, sugars and sweets, poultry. Poultry is not being as affected as much right now. I think that's kind of surprising. You're like, isn't that also chickens? But it's a different production process and different life cycle for the poultry that we eat as meat than as eggs, so it's not being affected in quite the same way right now, though it certainly could be if we see bird flu increase in prevalence. You see some other meats as well there. Prices are going to be going up, and then pork and fats and oils down on the bottom, we actually expect to see price decreases. You'll see also on the right, I say food at home and food away from home. So food at home is the stuff you buy at the grocery store, right? So food at home prices will increase less than food away from home prices. Food away from home would be things like restaurants. We'll hear more about restaurants in a little while. And again, tariffs may drive up these prices as well. Okay, I want to talk briefly about total food spending in Washington. All right, so one of the things we might be interested in is, okay, this is the national kind of setting. What's happening specifically here, and what's that kind of long-term trend over time in spending? So this is in $1988, which might not be really meaningful per you. So the point that I want to make here is just about the trend over time. So this is in constant dollars. We have seen the dark blue is statewide food at home. The darker orange is statewide food away from home. And then the light blue is U.S. food at home, and the light orange is U.S. food away from home. Okay, so we see that we have seen, in terms of in real terms, so even accounting for inflation, we have seen this kind of increase over time in spending. But you see we're starting to see that dip after about 2021 in that per capita food sales. In nominal terms, so that's like today's dollars, the Washington per capita, so per person in the state, total food sales in 2023 was $8,297. So that's how much per person folks are spending on food in the state. Now, I just want to point out, of course, that's just an average, right? And so when we think about how that impacts people across the income spectrum, I just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation. That's 24.4% of gross annual income, so before taxes or anything like that, for someone working full-time at the Washington state minimum wage, okay? So that's a huge portion of your income to be spending on food. And Jen's gonna talk a little bit more about that shortly. Just another, to tee up Jen's talk as well, we can see this uneven distribution of impacts in terms of what share of income is spent on food. So at the lowest income quintile, so this is the lowest, folks with the lowest 20% of incomes, right, you see that they spend a much larger share, over 30% of their income, that's the yellow bar, on food. And then as your income rises, right, you see that a smaller share of your income is spent on food. So that means the people that are most harmed by price increases are the folks at the lowest, with the lowest incomes, right? Okay, now I want to quickly shift to say a few things about local food spending, and this comes from the Consumer Food Insight Survey led by Dawn Thilmany at Colorado State University, who was invited to be here and couldn't be, and so I'm going to share a little bit about her work. She's the director of the Northwest and Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center and a fellow agricultural economist. And so some of the work that she and her team has done have looked at the at online shopping nationally. So nationally, we see, this is looking at different types of places that folks can buy food. So super centers and supermarkets, convenience and discount. You see a variety of different food stores here, right? And so we see the red is 2022 and the blue is 2023. And you can see curbside on the left and delivery on the right. So we're seeing increases, right, in some of our these activities over time, both curbside and delivery, right? And it's interesting to see that we've seen that kind of uptick from 2022 to 2023. I don't think they have 2024 data yet in a number of these different food categories. So online, folks are staying home, not just because of the Seattle freeze, right, but actually nationally, right, and they're getting curbside and delivery. And then 54% of shoppers from local and regional food stores used online shopping in one of these 2 years. If we look at the Pacific Northwest and Rockies specifically, okay, this is looking at, you can see the definitions at the bottom for what is a core, mid-level, and local consumers, right? So we see that we have seen our local spending holding pretty steady, okay, in terms of the spending per consumer. And then we also have seen, we have seen some of these peripheral local consumers with some interest in spending. Right. Let you take a look at that for a sec. There's a lot going on here. All right. And new customers, also important here to think about, there's both catering to your core customers, right, making them happy, and there's also who are those other folks that you might be able to bring in. And especially right now, I actually think that right now with this kind of time of economic uncertainty, a lot of people are looking towards their communities. I think it's a great time to reconnect with people and to share your story, because there's just so much uncertainty about what's happening nationally, right? And so we do see this new in 2023 group. So the blue here are all folks who are new to direct markets, food boxes, specialty retail, farmers markets, and independent restaurants. So we saw that there were new customers in each of these channels, and now is really a time to connect with those folks and share with them your story and those community connections in this time of uncertainty. So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jen Otten.
not advancing from that. Oh, there we go. Okay. I got to go back one. Okay, here we go. So I also had 2 eggs, and I hope everyone got their fair share. It was more from this perspective of like, I didn't want to waste anything. So I don't know. Anyway, also Zoe said that the presentations were going to get more positive after this, but she lied. So I am going to talk about, unfortunately, the continued impacts of the increased cost of living on food security, which a lot of my colleagues are at Hunger Action Day today. So I'm going to share a little bit of the types of information that they're sharing at the state level today, and I'm going to do a little bit on the legislative outlook related to policies at the state level that are going on in Washington State. I'm Jen Otten, and what I'm going to present on today is the Washington State Food Security and Food Assistance Survey. We've been doing this since 2020. This is our 5th wave, and we just finished the 5th wave in fall. So I'm going to share some results that literally just are hot off the press, came out last week. For those of you who want to look at the full brief, you can click on that QR code and it'll take you straight to the project page, and you can click on brief 16. I'm representing a larger team here, and the last 2 waves of this survey were funded by the Washington State Department of Agriculture, just kind of for full disclosure there a little bit. So before I don't know why this is, come on. Okay, Zoe. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's a slow. Okay, I have to prepare for that. All right, I'll slow down my talking. Just to give you a little bit about what this survey is, there's been 5 waves of the survey, and those are the boxes that you see across the top representing each one of the waves. And it gives you the date of when that wave occurred, and then underneath that are the number of responses per survey wave. So you can see that each year we've gone up in the number of people who've responded to this survey. So the wave that I'm going to talk about today is the one where 5,528 people have responded. Now I'm going to move down to the bullets. There's a couple of important things about this survey. One is it started in 2020, and we were really focused on the pandemic impacts. We've been looking at food security, food assistance use, economic well-being, and also the health of Washingtonians. And as food prices have gone up, as the policies and the supports for people have changed, we've tried to kind of capture how that's impacting people over time. We use convenience sampling. It's an online survey. That's the second bullet. The third bullet is perhaps the most important, and I'll show you why in a minute, but we oversample low-income households and households using food assistance so that we really know what's going on at the state level. Then finally, it's offered in 9 languages. Just people ask me that question a lot. So those are the 9 languages that it's offered in. Now I'm going to do something a little academic in the next slide. I'm sorry. It's just who I am. I want to define food security for all of you because not everyone is aware of food security. A lot of people think that food security equals hunger, but it's much more than just hunger. We use the USDA classification for food security. And so this little triangle, you see high food security and marginal food security. Those are considered food secure using the USDA questionnaire that is part of our survey, and that's how we've also defined it. And then the last 2, low food security and very low food security, are what's referred to as food insecurity. And what this means is it's people who have limited or uncertain access to adequate food. And it's not just hunger, it's that people aren't getting enough quantity or quality, and you know, it's more than hunger, right? It can lead to outcomes like hunger and malnutrition, but it's having that insecurity in where your next meal is coming from. Just to give you a little bit of information there when I talk about food security and food insecurity. I don't know why it's taking so long. I don't know. Mariah, this might be stuck. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly talk to you about food security prevalence and distribution. And so in our sample of the 5,528 responses, and I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was going to look so small in here, but what you see in this pie chart are that 45% were food secure and 55%, which is the addition of low food security plus very low food security, were food insecure. Now we know that 55% of people in the state are not food insecure, but 55% in our sample were food insecure. Now this is a really important point, and those of you who deal in food security, I'm just gonna, this is not on the slide, but I'm gonna tell you this. when the national survey comes out and it says that only 10% of people in Washington are food insecure, it is really only tracking a little bit over about 1,000 people from Washington state. So it's really only 180 people that they're talking about that are food insecure when they talk at the national level. They cannot give you detail on what 180 people are using, and in any way, shape, or form is that representative of what people are using for food assistance. That's why we oversample. It's why 55% of our sample is food insecure. It's so that we can tell you what people are using where in the state. So we have over 3,000 individuals who are using food assistance, and that's to give you context for like the next few slides that I'm going to show you and why it's important that we actually have a high number in our survey. One of the really important parts is that we're able to show that food insecurity is experienced at all incomes. So you see here the yellow and the orange, even at income levels of $75,000 or $150,000 or more, you can see that we still have people who are experiencing food insecurity. There we go. It's felt unevenly, and I think many of you have heard this before, but it's households with children have higher rates of food insecurity in our survey, lower income households, those with less education, households, non-white households, respondents in transgender, non-binary, or other gender categories are experiencing more food insecurity. We see actually the age levels where we see a lot of households with children, or a lot of single households, people who are kind of newly coming into the job market are experiencing more food insecurity, larger households, and then those with housing situations other than owning or renting. I'm going to show you this next slide, but I'm not going to spend much time on it. I don't know why these aren't advancing. It's so very weird. It's going to come back. I feel it. I don't know. Technology is like my worst nightmare, FYI. Having like a technology problem. Okay, this is a bookmark, so you can go back to this. But what we're able to do is look at food insecurity at the county level. So you can go and you can check out your county across Washington state. The only thing to notice from this slide, because it's really small numbers, is that food insecurity is high in every single county. It's not as if there's some counties that are worse off than others. And so just know that this is part of the brief that we've got, and you can go take a look at that. The next thing I'm going to do when the slide gets there is talk to you about food assistance use. And it's on there. I don't know why. There we go. Please don't advance. Okay. We have the same kind of thing where we look at food assistance use by county. And overall, 55% of people are using food assistance in our sample. And so I'm going to be able to tell you a lot about the types of food assistance people are using and where. But you can, again, go back to our data and take a look at your county and see. It's the same takeaway here, which is that no matter what county you live in, there is a high food assistance use right now. 33% or more, even in the lowest county, are people who are experiencing food insecurity and using food assistance. And we hear that from food banks, right? That the food is flying off the shelves, and that we're seeing food assistance use go up. We see food assistance use in those with less education, less income. You can see 89, the way to read this, 78% of people with high school or less education are using food assistance in our sample. 89% with incomes less than $15,000, not surprising. And we see the unemployed are using more food assistance, and those with housing status other than renting or owning. The red circle is circled around, again, we see people even in high income categories are using food assistance. So people even in the $75,000 and up or $150,000 or up are also using food assistance. When it goes to the next slide, food assistance use is higher among those. Oh, geez. Food assistance use is higher among households with children and larger households, and again, you can see that 73% of households in our sample that had children were using food assistance. And then some of the other interesting things, the most commonly used food assistance programs are food banks and pantries, followed by SNAP. And SNAP, for those of you who don't know, is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's called Basic basic income in Washington, and also food stamps is another way that people know that, just to kind of cover all the bases there. And then we see school meals, followed by summer EBT, fruit and vegetable incentive programs, mobile food banks, and so on. But you can kind of get a sense of where the big top three are. No matter how we cut the data, those top three are the three that always show up as the most used. And so I'm going to show you different ways of cutting the data, and we can look at that. Don't know. Okay. So here's food assistance use by urban and rural households. Urban and rural households. We have urban on your left and rural on your right. And again, you can see that the top three are food banks, SNAP, and school meals. And there's actually not a lot of difference between rural and urban homes and how they use food assistance. But when we look at, there it is. When we look at households with children and without children, you can see that there are actually big differences in sort of the way that people use food assistance. And so people are definitely turning to more programs that are designed for families with children, but they are also using, even, for example, households with children are the one on your left, and without children is the one on your right. You can see even differences among some of the programs that they're using. And part of that is oftentimes you can see, for example, a good one is SNAP. 39% of households with children are using SNAP, and 54% of households without children are using SNAP. And that's because families with children often don't qualify for SNAP, but they're very much in need of food assistance use. And so you can kind of get a sense with this data of how those households differ. Okay, sorry, the slide thing is slowing me down. I'm a really fast talker most of the time, but this is, the lag time is like, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to get into this final part of the presentation, which I'll do really quick, which is that when we looked at economic well-being in households, as Zoe was showing you, U.S. food prices actually rose more than any other spending category except transportation from 2019 to 2023. So food is the big cost. When we asked households what bills were hard to afford over the last month, groceries were number one. They were number one. Oh, wow. Okay. Where's Mariah? Okay, the hard to afford expenses of everything that people said, groceries were number one. You can see, okay, so I'm gonna walk through the beginning of this slide, which is that overall is that gray bar. So 42% said that groceries were the most hard to afford expense for them over the last month. And then if you see food insecure in yellow, you can see that 67% of food insecure households found rated groceries as the hardest to afford bill in the last month. 12% of food secure individuals, and then we also broke it down by urban and rural. So, but you can see that there's really no difference between urban and rural. You also see the other expenses that were rated as hard to afford were rent and mortgage and utilities. And when we asked them what types of groceries were the hardest to afford, it was things like things that were animal proteins or fresh produce. Okay, so to cope with price increases, we asked people, you know, what did you do in order to cope with all of these increased prices? And people did things like shop for lower prices, restricting food quantity and quality. They were creative about using food, or they restricted spending on food away from home, or delayed major purchases. The one that I have circled in red and then the arrow, 70% of food insecure individuals said that they coped with price increases by restricting their food amount and quality. So that is not a good number, and that's something to really pay attention to in this particular data. All right, I'm going to skip the next one, and then this is the last slide, I hope. Well, okay, so, and this is really not good for their mental well-being. So we did ask households, like, how this was also, how anxiety, stress, and depression were impacting them in this last wave. And you can see that overall, people are feeling anxious and depressed and very stressed this fall, but particularly food insecure households. You can see that they're feeling greater anxiety, depression, and stress. This next slide I'm just going to leave in the deck that you can look at later. I think you get access to the slides. I don't know why it's not advancing, but there we go. Okay, this is just the key findings, but I've gone over all of that with you today. These are technical notes if you want to know definitions of things that are in this slide. And and then the last thing I was going to end with, if this will go. Okay. Maybe I'll skip. Do you want me to skip the legislative update or do it? Because I feel like I'm taking too long now because of the slide advance problem. Yeah. It won't. It goes forward on the screen, so I'm seeing the next slide, but then it won't. So like, it will like scroll here, and then it won't go here. Yeah, but each slide is like. Sorry about that. So just use the arrow up here, or you'll advance me, or I don't know. Well, I have 4 left. Do you want me to just? I don't know. Okay. Okay, I'll go through this really quickly, which is so thinking about the Washington State food security priorities, Zoe, I'm actually going to clip through this first half because I think Zoe already covered this, right? Some of the key issues. We know that there's surging demand for food assistance, and we have limited data, and the data we've got is from this survey, and there's a lot more data that I didn't share. And Zoe mentioned some of the widespread supply chain disruptions, that donations are down to food assistance, and that we see a lot of impacts on the hunger relief and ag workforces, and that we need a lot of cross-sector coordination. And I think you all in the room know this. We've had a lot of coordination, I think, that's happened during COVID through emergency food assistance, competitive resiliency grants, We Feed WA, ag viability, and some of the school purchasing programs. I know all of you have experienced some of the big changes that are going on here. But there's a lot of uncertainty, right? We've got a new governor, and we don't know how he feels about everything. We do have the same ag cabinet leader. You all may have heard that we're going to keep Derek Sandison, which I think many of you are pretty happy about. And for those of you who aren't involved in the legislature, the long session has begun, and it will be at the end of April that we'll know some of the decisions. They'll be working on the budget for the next biennium, right? And at the same time, we've got a $4 billion deficit, so there's going to have to be some hard choices as they balance the budget. We also don't know what the next farm bill is going to do, or even if it will look like the farm bill that we are used to seeing for many decades at this moment. It may be pulled apart. So, only 2 slides. Sorry. One more back. Yeah. Okay, we'll try these. So last 2 slides. For those of you who haven't been paying close attention, I wanted to show you that there were a lot of budget asks related to ag and food assistance in the proposal in the fall, and I want to show you which ones were supported and which ones were not supported, and I certainly don't cover probably all of the ag ones. I kind of sit a little bit more on the food assistance side. But we see that the Washington budget requests that were not supported, meaning Inslee didn't support them. It doesn't, now we're going forward into Ferguson, so we don't know what's going to happen here in the transition, right? But the ones not supported are these top ones, and then the budget requests that were tentatively supported by Inslee, and now we're learning that the new governor will support them as well, include enhanced food assistance, climate livestock composting, and the equity and environmental justice, ag mental health services for underrepresented farmers and ranchers. Unfortunately, some of the ones that you're used to seeing, like the small meat and poultry assistance, local food systems, infrastructure grants, and so on, were not supported by Inslee. So we'll see what happens in the transition. And here are the policies that I've been monitoring, and I'm sure there are many more on the ag side, and their bill numbers. And so these might affect the funding that's available to all of you, or the ones that you get involved with when you're selling product or thinking about product. So Whew, I'll stop there. Sorry for the slides.
Hi, everybody. Anthony Antone, Washington Hospitality Association. Let me get a sense of the room so I know who I'm talking to. How many people are in the restaurant business? Okay, good number. How many people are restaurant owners or managers? Okay, handful. Welcome. How many people have ever eaten in a restaurant? Oh, good. I'm going to talk a lot about a changing model today in the industry. But I want to be clear, I want to be optimistic that we're going to find change. And so as I talk about it, it might appear that I'm coming across as negative, but I want to be the upper. So I know there's some people who are like, hey, we got some down stuff going on. I also think the conference has already been a success because I found 2 fellow industry researchers and 3 to work with and talk to. So I'm hoping we continue this relationship, share data, and learn from each other as we go. So with that, every year I do a state of the industry, and this year the theme of the industry model is broken in hospitality and restaurants. We've just gotten to the point where it's no longer functional. So we're going to have to change. Things break, but you fix things, right? So you recognize, okay, it's broken, but it isn't the end of the world. There'll still be restaurants a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But the model that they traditionally work on is now no longer working. And we're going to talk a little bit about why and some of the changes we're going to see. I'm eyeing what portion of this audience has ever seen Get Smart from the 70s. Anybody remember that? All right. Inevitably, there was always 1 out of 3 episodes of Get Smart where the walls are closing in on all sides. From the scientists, I have no idea how that would physically work with other stuff, but this is very much the feeling of many restaurateurs right now. You saw the higher costs that are coming at us in a lot of different areas, and typically when higher costs come at us, we dip into reserves and our margins while we make adjustments. But COVID wiped those out. And so there's not a lot of room on that side. And what we really saw we've been making changes for a lot of years because a lot of these things have been coming at us for a while, and the industry's already made a lot of obvious changes. We already have fewer employees. We already have different kind of hours. We already have adopted some technology. So the ones that are just like, hey, go do this, the industry's kind of already done. What really impacted us in 2024 was the consumers' pushback on our ability to raise prices. And when consumers said basically no more on the prices, that really created that sense of panic from a lot of operators. And so if you're really, really into the industry, and I kind of am, you'll recognize the stuff from 1998. And in fact, if you buy a book, for the most part, education still teaches this business model, which is if you're opening a restaurant, on average, it's a third food, a third labor, 30% everything else, and hopefully you make a 4% margin. That's kind of what's talked about a lot in books and otherwise. We went through a lot of changes in Washington, and the national studies showed that Washington's model changed. Washington and Oregon kind of broke away from the rest of the country for a lot of different reasons that I'm not talking about today, but our labor costs went up to 36, our food costs adjusted a little bit. We took about a 25% cut in the profitability of restaurants, still survived, and that model year over year stood true for about a decade. The first post-COVID study was done. Deloitte & Touche works with national groups and collects thousands of P&Ls, profit and loss statements across the country for restaurants. And this is why the theme for our State of the Industry is what it is this year. The profit margin for restaurants is down to 1.5% in Washington. That's 60% lower than the national average. I was talking to my pastor yesterday, who's a wonderful woman, and she's like, "What's a net margin?" So I'm like, "Well, if I stayed away from that, in 2023, your average restaurant did about 1.1 million. So on a 1.5% margin, their life, dreams, hopes, challenges brought them a profit of $16,500. That was their income from their restaurant. Now, this is on average. So for some people in the room, like, someone made a profit last year? Well, 50% of we're above that number. Some other people who are like, I had a great year. I don't know what you're talking about. It's an average. When we talk about the food dollar, if I want to go back to here, if you are a high protein place with those costs, your food costs are going to be higher. If you're an all noodle house, your food costs are going to be lower. These are averages of thousands of restaurants if you look across the system. So think of this more broadly versus getting hung up in one particular. In hospitality in general, it's not just in the restaurant side. We're seeing it on the hotel side as well. Occupancy rates are still down from 2023, which drives a lot of traffic and other things in tourism into our industry. And we're still seeing that hotel sales are not caught up with inflation post-COVID. I think one of the really things, as we are data people, and we're going to talk a lot about after the future years, I feel like we stopped doing comparisons on like 20 to 23. And we're like, what did we do in 2019? Now I think we're going to start talking about inflation and adjusting for inflation. Because if sales are up, but they're not up in excess of inflation, we're not up. And our margins are actually down. And how do we talk about it in a simple way for people to understand? But for the same, our sales are not keeping up with inflation. So this box is getting closer and closer and closer and closer to how we feel. So that felt pretty negative. And again, I'm going to try to get back to optimists. The evidence is showing up in different ways. We did see a fewer number of hotels turning in sales tax. Seattle's restaurants per capita has dropped about 12%. But even more so, I think the biggest trends in 2024, I think, are also really interesting. Whenever the restaurant industry's top trend is value pricing, that tells you that people are panicked, and they're trying to figure out how to generate customers and generate other stuff. So typically when I say, hey, couponing or discounting or other things are back, as an industry representative, I'm like, uh-oh. That's a scary thing, because that means the industry's trying to figure out how to keep customers going during tougher times. And restaurant satisfaction is down. I've been with the industry, except for a 5-year stint with Boeing, for the better part of 20 years. This is the first time I've ever seen restaurant satisfaction down in the history of watching all the numbers. Not really surprising when we have fewer employees and prices are up, and we have shorter hours, and we're closing days of the week. We're creating frustrations for our guests, but that's kind of some qualitative evidence that our guests are not happy with some of the changes we're making and trying to survive. So our choices are limited, but I want to be an optimist. This is a puzzle we have to figure out. And the first part of the puzzle is we either have to figure out how to reduce, oh gosh, I grabbed the wrong president, that's on me. We either have to reduce our costs about $30,000 per million in sales. And so how do we do that? Where do we find costs to drop that? The reason I just realized I grabbed the wrong presentation, and I'll upload the better one for later so people have it should say 70 to 90 increase in sales, not 50. So we can increase sales, we can increase tourism, we can figure out how to encourage people to come back out, we can try different things, but we have to increase our sales somehow about 70 to 90,000 per unit, or per million. And so that's the challenge in front of us. I want to be the optimist. We can figure this out. What does that look like? You're going to see people trying things like different service charges instead of tips. You're going to see people trying QR codes instead of other ways to order on the table. You're going to see people trying out robotics in kitchens. You're going to see people trying to drive different kinds of sales to different parts of the day. You're going to see people trying to get out of what they normally do to do this. And if we can figure that out, if we can find something that our guests like and our employees like, because they're a big part of this, right? They're 40% of our costs, and they're part of our family. We can figure this out. But the first half of this year, you're going to see a lot of operators trying. Just let me give this a shot. Okay, that didn't work. Did I not give it long enough to work? Do I try something else? Let me try this. You're going to see the association sharing ideas out there, not because I'm promoting any one idea. I'm just trying to get people to think differently. A 1.5% margin is just simply not sustainable. So what do we try? What does that look like? How do you generate? So you're going to see us sharing a lot of ideas. Because I want to be really clear, we're not asking the government to save us on this. We're not asking for a change in policy. We understand the policies have existed. We just got to figure it out now. and how do we figure it out, how do we change? And so a lot of unique ideas are going to be out there. Some you're going to love, some I hope you understand, some are just going to be different, but hopefully we find that. If we can't, but I want to be optimistic we can, right? The happy guy, we're going to figure this out. If we can, we do have to face the reality that we're going to have to reduce the number of restaurants in Washington between 4 and 9%, and then redistribute the guests. That's the second option. So if we can't figure that out, if people don't like the changes in service, if people don't like the technology, if ultimately the costs keep driving us higher and higher and higher, then we just simply need fewer restaurants. If you follow restaurant data, there's always restaurant churn. So I'm not talking about more restaurants going out of business. In a good year, 18% of restaurants go out of business or change hands. It's a hard, hard business. A lot of people get into it to pursue their dream. For those who raised your hand and said you're in this industry, I know you know how hard it is. But I'm actually talking fewer restaurants. Because if fewer restaurants can exist, then they can share the remaining things. This is all before any new costs in 2025, and these are state average costs. So if I'm showing this in some communities, they'll say that 30,000 to 70 to 90,000 gap is not nearly enough because the costs in their communities have gone up much, much higher. And they're right. And some other communities are like, I don't have to do that much. And in some smaller communities where some of the costs are more stable, they're probably right. But these are the averages. So this is kind of where we're at right now. And the idea, I'm on a 20-city tour visiting different groups of operators. I'm meeting about 30 operators per city. And the common theme is, what are you doing? What are you trying? What's that? They all know that they have to change. And I'm hearing a lot about ideas, concepts, a small amount of panic or urgency, but also focus on how do we change, how do we become different types of restaurants in the state of Washington. So our general hope, and if you're around anyone who can help us with that, we're hoping for not a whole lot of new costs in 2025. We need time to figure it out. We need time to test solutions. We need time to test ideas. And if you have a great idea, share them with your local restaurant. If you're friends with them, don't annoy them. But in general, we need ideas for change. We need ideas to cut those costs. We need ideas to drive more revenue. And we need to share those out there. And then if you're just one of those, not just, one of those wonderful guests that we love, that everyone said, hey, I'm going to be able to visit a restaurant, we're asking for patience and grace. We're trying new ideas. We don't know what's going to work. I think if you were to ask me the model changes in 1998, we knew we were going to have fewer bussers, and we ended up with fewer bussers. We knew we were going to have some higher pricing, and we had some higher pricing. We knew some of those obvious changes we're going to have to make. I'm an optimist, but I have no clue what's going to work right now. It doesn't mean that something's not going to work. It just means I don't have any idea what's going to stick. Our service charge is going to work. You're seeing some operators saying, let's get rid of tips, and let's pay people a flat $40 an hour. And in exchange for $40 an hour, there'll be no more tipping, but there'll be a 20% service charge. That only works if our servers like it and if you like it. If you get all upset that there's a service charge and you stop coming in, well, that really didn't solve our problem. If our workers don't like it, because there was one operation where they're like, we don't want to make a flat $40 an hour. We want our tips. So they quit en masse. So the restaurant went back to tipping and back to the minimum wage plus tips because the servers didn't want it. What's going to work? Some will work. Different kinds of places have different price points, different guests, different guest tastes. And so it's going to be a bit of year chaos, a lot of different kind of technologies and concepts being adopted. Again, the optimism is me, we're going to figure this out. And I can't work with the data folks to come back next year and say, here's what's tracking, here's what didn't work. If you're getting in and you haven't figured it out yet, here are the things that you shouldn't try. But basically, we'll figure this out here. So with that, I'm going to pass it on and then be part of the panel.
So, is it on? Hello? Okay. All right. Thank you, all of the speakers that came before me, for setting up kind of that economic context. But what I'm going to share today is some information about consumers and their attitudes and behaviors, particularly as it pertains to premiumization and value. And I'll get to why those two things in just a second. But first I want to acknowledge, yes, based on everything that we've heard so far, consumers really prioritize getting a good value. All of this data is about their food and beverage shopping in general, as well as food service. So 78% of consumers say getting a good value on my food and beverage is a high priority or is even my top priority. Just 43% say that getting premium items is a high or top priority. So why am I talking about these two things together? Well, we really need to think about what do these terms, what do these concepts mean to consumers today? And that has shifted over time, over the past 30 years, over the past 10 years. So one of the things that we heard when we went out and talked to consumers about this was really exemplified by this quote from Daryl, who told us, I don't understand why people are out there going and buying these cheap things that then they're not even gonna, they're gonna taste it, it's not good, they're gonna waste half of it. They could have spent just a little bit more and enjoyed it and utilized the whole thing, and then it would have been worth their while better. And what this expresses is what we call at the Hartman Group the new value paradigm. So the old value paradigm is this fairly rigid model that really puts price as the denominator for any kind of decision that consumers are making about determining what good value is. The new value paradigm, you'll see, is shown with these gears, and that's because these things all interact with each other in the mind of the consumer. They are thinking about all these pieces together in a very complex way. They're not actively thinking about this, but this is how this plays out, and you'll notice that there are several more qualitative components that we've added to this model from the previous model, which are things like convenience. How is this going to make my life easier? Experience. How is this going to make my life better? Relevance. Am I going to actually use this product? Does it fit my needs? And that really speaks back to what Daryl was saying on the previous slide. So 64% of consumers consider good value in their grocery items to mean getting a good quality for the price. So these things all have to be thought of in concert with each other. The other piece that has evolved over the past 30 or so years is what premium means to consumers. Back before the 2000s, premium was really about fancy items. It was about things that you'd use for a special occasion. You're not going to take them out every day. And it also was things that were typically restricted to a few particular categories. So you had premium cheeses, you had premium wines, maybe some premium chocolate or condiments, but that's about it. You didn't have premium across the entire grocery store. And then we entered the 2000s, and we shifted into what we're calling the foodie era, which is when consumers started to really en masse explore different cuisines, become much more curious and experimental in their food choices. Think about, going to a parking lot with a million different food trucks and trying different items there. That was really the idea of premium, and that also introduced the possibility for things like fresh and less processed to be really important parts of what premium meant. In addition to the fancy things, these all kind of have built on each other. And then the most recent iteration of what we're seeing in premium is what we're calling functional. So that could be health and wellness kind of functional, like we talk about functional foods and functional beverages. Of course, became important to consumers during the pandemic. Many consumers were more willing to pay a little bit extra for things that could help them stay healthy, but it also means functional in the sense of convenience, things that will help make consumers' lives easier. These are all how we think about premium today, and really speak to this idea that premium has shifted. There are a lot of things that used to be premium that now are just considered standard, and the things that are premium have shifted towards these more functional items. This, of course, is a very subjective idea, right? And this is exemplified in particular by a consumer we talked to who said, in my family, hot Cheetos are a premium item. She said, I get it. I know that that's not like something everybody would consider premium, but for me, for my family, it's something that's really special, that we don't have very often, that tastes really good, and that I can give to my family as a special treat. So for me, that's premium. So that's kind of the subjective aspect of premium. But there's also this much more concrete comparative definition of premium where you're at the grocery store and you're looking at a shelf and, okay, you can tell which ones are the premium items. And you mostly can tell that based on some objective criteria, which of course price is going to be a piece of that. But also these culturally salient quality cues like organic, like is it in a glass package instead of all the competitors that are in a plastic package? Different attributes that are part of how consumers identify and understand premium. And so we wanted to look at what that meant in terms of how willing are consumers to pay for some of these attributes. So what you're looking at here is a percentage among those who already said that this attribute is a premium attribute for them. It signals a premium product. So for instance, the top bar here, 76% of those consumers who consider better nutrition to be premium say, yes, I'm willing to pay more for it. So what we see when we ask about all different kinds of attributes is that those that are related to health tend to fall towards the top. Those that are related to things related to functionality type things, as well as some other things in there. Supports local producers is in here, which is great. 63% of consumers say they're willing to pay more for that. But then there are things that fall towards the bottom of this list that are maybe a little surprising, things like sustainability, fair labor practices. And it's important to keep in mind that doesn't mean that consumers don't want those things. It doesn't mean that consumers don't think they're premium. It just means that consumers expect those things. These are becoming table stakes ideas that consumers just want to have, but they're not willing to pay extra for them. Obviously, that's a big challenge for all of us in this room, but I think when we're thinking about all of this together, as a whole, hopefully there are ways to work around this. So one of those ideas would be, how do we think about value in terms of premium products? And what we have found is that value really lies at this intersection between price, health, and experience for consumers. And how do we know that? Because when we ask them what provides good value in a premium product, they say, well, I have to get a fair price for it. That's the first thing they say. More than half of consumers say that. But just as many say, well, the product is premium or gives me good value if it allows me to make a healthy choice. And then the third thing is this product allows me to enjoy an elevated experience. So that might be that it tastes better than average, or that it allows me to connect with my local producer, or it allows me to have this really enjoyable experience at a restaurant. Another thing that I want to acknowledge is that consumers do get it. They understand that there's a connection between quality and price, and that better quality does simply cost more. 49% of consumers say that, yes, I accept that better quality costs more because of time, labor, expertise. But that's not that high, right? 49% means that 51% of consumers are saying, oh, well, I'm not willing to accept that. And that's going to be a big challenge for us. It's better among millennials. 59% of millennials are willing to accept this. But this means that we have to really show consumers still why they're paying higher prices if we're going to charge them higher prices. But we are focusing on trying to get more optimistic as the day goes on. So on that note, I want to leave you with this really interesting finding that, if you'll recall, when I was showing the picture of Grey Poupon, I said that premium products back in the 90s and before were reserved for special occasions. But now that's not the case anymore. 42% of consumers say that they use all or some of the same brands and products on both special occasions and everyday occasions. And you can see across this chart, there's lots of different reasons that consumers might use a premium product. So what I want to leave you all with is, how can you see this as an opportunity? If your product is premium or your offering or service is premium, how can you encourage consumers to use it on a daily basis, make it part of their everyday routines? And yes, you might tell me, like, price is still going to be a challenge there, but think about that new value paradigm. Think about those 6 different components of value, and how can you touch on as many of those as possible? How can you demonstrate, yes, this is going to make your life easier, or yes, this is going to provide a really special experience, and that's going to help you justify that price premium, and it's going to help you to make your product something that consumers are willing to use every day and increase your volume sales. So that is all I have today, but I think, oh, you're back.
Okay, one last thing from me here, on a hopeful note, I'm not coming back to just economic doom and gloom, is that, so a couple of years ago, the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service was able to fund the creation of regional food business centers across the country. And as I said, my colleague Don Thilmany from Colorado State University was invited to be here today and couldn't be. And so I want to talk briefly about some of the things that the center offers that can help in all of the realms that we were just talking about and support businesses across the realms. And I know there are other service providers here today as well. The regional food business centers, we're in the Northwest and Rocky Mountain region, which is massive, as you can see from this map. The partners in Washington State who are leading the team are WSU Food Systems and the Washington State Department of Agriculture Regional Markets Program. And the center has 6 state teams, 1 for each of the states, and then 4 theme teams that provide theme-focused grants and technical assistance. So there's kind of 2 different avenues for grants and technical assistance. And you can see those cross-cutting themes along the left-hand side of your screen here. And so I just wanted to let you know that as you're looking to do some work related to any of these topics that we just talked about, that there are these business builder grants open to eligible Washington businesses right now. And although this is federally funded, so far there remains funding available for this program, and we're hoping that continues. And so you can see here that there's 3 theme-based business builder grant opportunities that are open right now, including with a close date very soon for March 1, so get on these if you're interested. And then there are more opportunities coming soon, theme-based and state-based grant opportunities that folks are working on. So there's a QR code at the bottom. Emily Whittier. Emily, are you here somewhere? Okay, Emily's in the center in the back. So Emily has a table kind of behind this, in this hallway behind these doors. So please reach out to Emily or stop by and see Emily if you would like to learn more about any of those programs with the Regional Food Business Center. Thank you.